Hi, this is Julie Harland, and I'm your Math Gal. Please visit my website at yourmathgal.com, where you could search for any of my videos organized by topic. In part 4 of Angles and Triangles, we define a right triangle and solve the two word problems below, one involving an isosceles triangle and the other involving a right triangle. This is part 4 in solving word problems dealing with the angles in a triangle. Remember, the sum of the angles in a triangle add up to 180 degrees. And in this problem, we're talking about an isosceles triangle. Remember, an isosceles triangle, there are two angles that have the same measure. So let's read through this. In an isosceles triangle, one angle is 16 degrees more than twice the measure of one of the equal angles, right? Because two of the angles have the same measure. Find the measure of each angle. Okay, so put the video on pause and try this on your own first. Define your variables and write an equation and see if you could solve it without any help from me. Okay, we've got three angles we're talking about. So let's just call that the first, second, and third angle. You could define it slightly differently. We know two of these have the same measure, right? And we know that one of them is 16 degrees more than twice the measure of one of those equal angles. So we first need to define the first and second angle, the two equal angles, with using the same variable in this case. So let's use x and x. And now the third angle is 16 degrees more than twice the measure of one of those. So we've got to add 16 degrees to something. I'm going to leave off putting the degree symbol, but in the end of the problem, we'll have to remember we are defining variables and writing an equation to answer this problem. So in the end, you do have to remember to write your angles in degrees. So 16 more than twice the measure. Well, twice the measure of one of these angles is 2x. So that's how I could define the third angle. All right, so we've defined three angles, and we know that when you add the three angles in a triangle, it adds up to 180 degrees. So let's do that. The first angle plus the second angle plus the third angle equals 180 degrees. So there's the first angle, there's the second angle, there's the third. Some people make a mistake and just write x plus 2x plus 16. Be careful. All right, next step would be to combine like terms over here on the left side. So that is 4x plus 16 equals 180. And then we solve that equation. Now there's more than one way to solve this equation. You could subtract 16 from both sides and divide by 4. I'm going to do it a little bit differently like I did in Angles and Triangles Part 3. If you have a common factor in all your terms, you could divide by that common factor to make the numbers smaller. So I noticed that 4 goes into all three of those numbers. So if I divide both sides by 4, I just get easier numbers to deal with. This is an optional way of solving this equation. So that gives me x plus 4 equals, and then 4 goes into 180, well 2 goes into it 90, and 2 goes into 90 and 45, so that's 45. And then I just subtract 4 from both sides. Now, you didn't have to use that method. You could have certainly subtracted 16, right? So over here, I'm going to write down the other way somebody else might have done it. This is the more traditional way. I don't like to always be traditional. I like the idea that I have options. So I could subtract 16 from both sides, get 4x equals 164, and then when you divide by 4, you still get x equals 41. The point is, one of the angles is 41 degrees, so that's what matters. 41 degrees and 41 degrees, that should be the two equal angles. And then what would the third angle be? It says it's 16 more than twice the measure. All right, so if we take 41 and we double it, we get 82, and it says it's 16 more than that. So in other words, I'm not even putting in 2x plus 16. I'm using my common sense. If somebody tells me it's 16 more than twice it, and I know that one of them is 41, I'm just saying, well, 2 times 41 is 82, and 16 more than that. So this would be 98. So now the question is, does that make sense? First of all, is it true that this third angle is 16 more than twice one of the equal angles? And that's certainly true. We did it over here. What's the other thing to check? That the angles add up to 180 degrees. So let's check that out. 41, 41, and 98. And add up, you get 180. It does check out. So the answer to this problem is, find the measures of each angle. You could just say, well, it's 41 degrees. These are the measures of the 3 angles. You could write this in words too, which I like to write sometimes. The angles add up to, I would say the angles are 41 degrees, 41 degrees, and 98 degrees. And there we've got our answer. All right, I want to talk about another kind of special triangle. We talked about the isosceles triangle. Now we're going to talk about the right triangle. In a right triangle, one of the angles is a right angle, so its measure is 90 degrees. So a right triangle looks something like this. One of the angles is a right angle and 90 degrees. In some countries, they call this a right angle triangle. All right, things are different depending on where you happen to live. All right, so let's just do a problem having to do with a right triangle. And what does that tell you about these other 2 angles? If this one's 90 degrees, what do these other 2 have to add up to? Well, altogether they're 180, so these other 2 have to add up to 90 degrees. So they're complementary. So by the way, the other 2 angles are complementary since they add up to 90 degrees. I don't know if all that fit in there. Let's move this over so you could read it. Okay, so they would be complementary angles. So now let's just do a problem having to deal with a right triangle. So here's our problem. In a right triangle, one of the angles measures 38 degrees. Find the measures of the other 2 angles. Okay, this isn't so bad. We've got 3 angles, right? So we've got the first angle, the second angle, and the third angle. One of them's 38 degrees, they told us. All right, what else do we know about a right triangle? What is one of the measures of the other degrees? 90 degrees. That's the right angle. So all I need is my third angle, x. Now there's 2 ways you might figure this out. You could add all 3, x plus 90 plus 38 equals 180. I'm putting in the degrees later. Someone might write all 3 angles add up to 180, and someone else might realize that the 2 smaller angles just add up to 90. So someone else just might write x plus 38 equals 90. Correct? Because they're complementary, the 2 other angles. So it doesn't matter which one of these equations you write, you should be able to find out what that third angle is. And then, of course, it says find the measure of the other 2. Well, one of them is 90. That's a given since it's a right triangle. So what does this give us? X plus 128 equals 180. We'll just subtract 128 from both sides. And that would give us x equals 52. That would end up being 52 degrees, right? And this one, we just subtract 38. A different person may have solved it this way. And they also got 52 degrees. So it doesn't matter which way you think about it. You know that one of the angles is 90, and now you know the other one is 52. So that's all you would write here. The other angles are 52 and 90 degrees. And actually, instead of saying R, I like to write the other angles measures R. Okay, that's just a little formality. Okay, and so that's our answer. And we could do a little check to make sure that, of course, 38 plus 52 plus 90 equals 180. That's pretty simple to verify. Please visit my website at yourmathgal.com where you can view all of my videos, which are organized by topic.